After this, Samson fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. The lords of the Philistines came to her and said, "Coax him and find out what makes his strength so great, and how we may overpower him, so that we may bind him in order to subdue him, and we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me what makes your strength so great and how you could be bound so that one could subdue you." Samson said to her, "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that are not dried out, I shall become weak and like anyone else." Then the lords of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings, and that had not dried out, she bound him with them. And while the men were lying in wait in an inner chamber, she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he snapped the bowstrings as a strand of fiber snaps when it touches the fire, so the secret of his strength was still not known. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have mocked me. You told me lies. Please tell me how you could be bound." He said to her, "If they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like anyone else." So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." The men were lying in wait in an inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Until now, you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you could be bound." He said to her, "If you weave 7 locks of my head with the web and make it tight with the pin, I shall become weak like anyone else." So while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web and made them tight with the pin. Then she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he woke from his sleep and pulled away the pin, the loom, and the web. Then she said, "How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me 3 times now and have not told me what makes your strength so great." Finally, after she had nagged him with her words day after day and pestered him, he was tired to death. So he told her his whole secret, and he said to her, "A razor has never come upon my head, so I have been a Nazirite from my mother's womb. I've been dedicated to God, and if my head were shaved, my strength would leave me. I would become weak and be like anyone else." When Delilah realized he had told her his whole secret, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, "This time come up, for he has told his whole secret to me." Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her, and they brought the money in their hands. She let him fall asleep on her lap. She called a man. He had him shave off the 7 locks of his head, and he began to weaken, and his strength left him. Then she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." When he woke from his sleep, he thought, "I will go as other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. So the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles, and he ground meal in the prison. There are deep sleepers, and then there is Samson. I love naps just as much as the next person, but I'm pretty sure I would not sleep through someone shaving my head. Then again, there are several aspects of Samson's life and his character that really don't make any sense. So Samson was a judge of Israel, and hence this story is found in the book of Judges. And during this period of Israel's history, the people elected judges to rule over them, and they were part military leader, part judicial decision maker. Famous judges include Deborah with her sidekick Barak, good judge, and there was Gideon. And this was a very tumultuous time in Israel's history, because if the judge was good and faithful to God, Israel was strong and independent. But if the judge was questionable in character and unfaithful to God, Israel struggled and became weak and fell under foreign rule. This happened time and time again. I know that sounds weird, like what leader would lead a country to become weaker? But when the judges were ruling, the Israelites were constantly fighting off oppression from surrounding nations like the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Canaanites. Now Samson, our long-haired deep sleeper, rose to power in a time of unfaithfulness in Israel, a time when they had fallen under the rule of another people group, the Philistines. So there are a few things you need to know about Samson before sweet Delilah ever enters the picture. One, Samson was an Old Testament miracle baby. So he was born to a childless couple. He was announced by an angel. Does that sound familiar? The whole bit. And the angel who announced his birth told his parents that Samson has to be a Nazarite. That means set apart. So there were three main ways that Nazarites were outwardly showing the world their set apartness. One, they did not drink alcohol. Two, they couldn't even eat grapes. That's really 1.5. Number two, they didn't touch anything dead. No corpses, no carcasses, no animal bodies. Three, they did not cut their hair. All of these practices were meant to emphasize life, pure, unadulterated existence. They were walking reminders to the Israelites of God's purity and presence and life. But immediately in this story, after we learn about Samson's Nazarite set-apartness, we are told that he carelessly starts breaking the rules. He marries a Philistine woman. He touches a lion's carcass. He drinks alcohol. He's also very violent, and his wife, who's not mentioned in this story, is killed in one of his skirmishes with the Philistines. Then he sleeps with a prostitute. So by the time he finally meets Delilah, we should not be surprised that most of Samson's actions are questionable at best. The other thing you need to know about Samson before we enter this story is that he loved games. That whole business with touching the lion's carcass and that skirmish that led to his first wife's death, that all happened because Samson was taunting a group of Philistines with a bizarre riddle that he made up. And that story about the prostitute involves him sneaking out of her chambers in the middle of the night and carrying away the city gates of Gaza to trick the Philistines. Samson loved these types of cat and mouse games. He was addicted to the thrill of deception, the delight of misleading someone. It makes sense then that Samson would entangle himself with a woman who is being paid to bring him down. This is the last sermon in our villain series, but I hope today's reading makes it clear that Delilah is not really the villain in this story. She's simply a woman who has caught the attention of a powerful man, and a group of his enemies are offering to pay her a very large sum of money to find out the source of his power. An opportunist, maybe, but she's completely transparent with Samson about her motivations. She point blank asks him 4 times in a row what would bind him so that he could be subdued. She even reveals her intention each time, saying, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." I mean, it doesn't get any more clear than this. Delilah is just playing her part. She's not the villain here. I think the villain in this story is within Samson himself. It's his own shadow side that does him in. The wise mother of drag, RuPaul, calls this our inner saboteur, the part of ourselves that leads us astray, the one that tells lies about ourselves, the one that works us up and pulls us down, the one that works against everything we're trying to achieve or accomplish in this life. And in Samson's case, it literally binds him up. Samson's inner saboteur is addicted to games and pushing the boundaries and flirting with disaster. He repeatedly delights in the fact that he has tricked Delilah, and yet his strength remains. And as the game goes on, he hints closer and closer to the truth about his power. He's suggesting it has something to do with his hair. But when he finally reveals the connection between his uncut mane and his faith in God, it almost comes as a surprise to Samson that the games are finally over. His inner saboteur has finally conquered him, and he really is now just like anyone else. But that wasn't what God had wanted for Samson. Samson was supposed to be set apart from everyone else. In the period of the Judges, as Israel struggled under the reign of one nation or another, the greatest question for those people was, What sets us apart from anyone else? The whole concept of being set apart was what God had called Israel to in the first place. It wasn't that God despised the other nations, the Philistines, the Moabites, the Ammonites. Rather, God had shown the Israelites a more excellent way of life, a way of faithfulness, a way of justice, a way of peace. And God had covenanted with them to be set apart and to live differently. And in return, God would be a different kind of God, not the vengeful, punishing kind that those other nations worshiped, but a loving, grace-filled, kind-hearted God of the universe. Samson was supposed to be set apart so that he could lead the Israelites with great strength and courage. He was set apart so that he could lead his nation to do mighty things in the name of our good, loving God. It is hard to be set apart, don't you think? Especially when what makes us different is tied to our religion. Imagine being asked to wear a shirt every day for the rest of your life with the words, "I heart Jesus" on the front. Or having Christian symbols like tattooed on your face. Maybe a little fish right by your eye, a little cross on your chin, a little Trinity symbol right between your eyes. It would force you to think about everything you said and did because everyone would know who you were and what you represented. Samson no doubt felt the weight of his luscious locks every minute of every day. But instead of living into his calling, instead of embracing his set apartness, he flirted with the boundaries as often as possible. What would it hurt to drink a little alcohol? What could possibly come of touching a dead lion? Why shouldn't I get involved with a Philistine woman? What would really change if she cut my hair? Samson says over and over again, if you do this to me, I'll be like anyone else. If you do that to me, I'll be like anyone else. But it's just another game. It's just another trick until it's not. Nazarites weren't supposed to cut their hair, but when they finally did, it was done as a religious ceremony, and they offered their hair to God. Remember, their practices were meant to emphasize life. And so their hair, which was growing their whole lives, symbolized their own life force. So when they finally cut their hair, it was given as an offering to God. Their hair, like their lives, belonged to God. But Samson's first haircut was not done in a religious ceremony. It was done while he slept. And the hair wasn't given to God. It was taken by Delilah, a woman who was being paid to find out how to steal his power. Samson flirted with the boundaries of being set apart until there were no more boundaries and he was no longer set apart. I read Samson's story as a cautionary tale. If you're like me, you would love to live your life like anyone else in this world. Beyond the basic needs of food and security and clothing, we want our children to have the best educations. We want our loved ones to have the best health care. We want the nicest house on the block and the most impressive resumes and the best bang for our buck. We want to be appreciated and admired. We want to be affirmed. We want to drive cars that are reliable, if not a little fancy. We want to take vacations that are relaxing, if not photo album worthy. We want to have partners who are proud to be seen with us and we're proud to be seen with them. We want to maybe even let them cook and do laundry from time to time. We want to be liked, maybe even loved by everyone we know. In so many ways, we just want to be like everyone else in this world. And it's tempting to come to church on Sundays and then blend in with the crowds Monday through Saturday. And yet God calls us to more. As people of faith, we're not called to be just like anyone else. Sometimes because of our faith, we're called to live in a way that is set apart. We may not be called to avoid alcohol or touching carcasses or cutting our hair, but we are called to be set apart in other very challenging ways. We're called to love our enemies. We're called to respond to hatred with love, to turn the other cheek and end cycles of violence. We're called to do right by the poor and the oppressed and the vulnerable in our society. We're called to stop criticizing others and to look inward to make changes, to welcome strangers and advocate for foreigners, to forgive people who hurt us, not just 7 times, but 77 times. We're called to be humble, to pray without ceasing, to speak out against injustice, to be a voice for the voiceless, to love the unlovable, to actively work for peace, to believe that death and darkness do not get the final word, to have faith in things unseen, to share the good news of Jesus Christ with all the world. These are not easy things to do. These are not things that everyone else does. But as followers of Christ, we are called to be set apart in our efforts to do them. My prayer for us at Claremont United Church of Christ is that we will not shrink from our calling, that we will not cast it off carelessly like Samson did, that we would not sleep through this life while our calling falls away and we settle for being like everyone else. That when things get ugly in this world and when our lives become hard and when we are struggling, we will not allow ourselves to be cut off from God and from one another. My prayer is that we will live into this calling, that we will embrace it, that we will go and out into the world and do mighty things of great strength and courage in the name of our loving God. That we will have the strength to silence our inner saboteurs and not let them bind us up. That we will be the weird ones at every gathering who laugh too loud and too often, who never have negative things to say about others, who listen to someone who's talking way longer than is a normal thing to do. That we are relentlessly hopeful people, that we're always practicing the art of peace and trying to forgive those who make us grit our teeth in irritation. That we are people who are way too generous and unreasonably kind and bizarrely friendly to everyone we meet. My prayer is that we, as followers of Christ, are different, and that we're different with a little zeal, that we have a little pizzazz in our kooky joy. So let us learn from Samson and give thanks for this holy challenge of being people who are set apart. Amen.